Another opportunity to sit down and chat with the commissioner of the MIAA, Mike Racy. Thank you as always for coming on, and hard to believe we're almost in November at this point in the academic year too.
I know. We're having a lot of fun, but things are sure flying by, Chris. Yeah, it's a fast pace. Once we get into the academic year, we're winding down the fall sports and getting ready for things to tip off here for our winter sports. But it's a great time of year, and I know there are teams that are still in the hunt for conference titles and NCAA bids and all that fun stuff. So next few weeks will be really exciting.
Yeah, it's weird that you mentioned the tip-off part for the winter sports. Is Brett Easley from the Sports Commission here in St. Joe was posting about an NCAA Division II women's classic tournament in 2 weeks, and I went, that can't be right. We're not there yet, right? And sure enough, we're here basically with the winter sports and the crossover that was already beginning. So
Yeah,
it's flying by.
it is flying by, but we're having fun, and it's great to be with you again this week.
We'll start this week's conversation with the Jerry Hughes Rising Star Award in the MIAA. Obviously, people, if they don't know who Jerry Hughes was, director of athletics for Central Missouri for decades, a huge part of the MIAA for years too, and passed away earlier this year. Obviously, left a huge legacy in the MIAA in Central Missouri. What is this Rising Star Award, and what was the purpose behind creating it in his honor?
Yeah, thanks, Chris, for opening with this. It's a very meaningful award that we're actually announcing it today on our website, that the Rising Star Award has been approved by our athletic directors and will be implemented and awarded for the first time this year. Jerry and I knew each other for about 30 years. I consider him a good friend. It was pretty sudden, his passing. I remember last December, he was with us in Kansas City for our athletic director meetings, and he got sick shortly before Christmas, and he was gone early in the new year, and so his passing was sudden. I know a lot of his friends and colleagues and folks he's worked closely with in the NCAA and the MIAA at UCM didn't have an appropriate chance to say goodbye, but we want to find ways to honor his legacy. And certainly one of the things that Jerry, I think, was very good at, Chris, was identifying talent and bringing people to Central that started their career at UCM or advanced their career at UCM and then went on to other things. Many coaches that spent time on the sidelines at Division I institutions got their start, coaching at UCM, being hired by Jerry, being coached and mentored by Jerry Hughes. And that's really what we want to do with this award, is within the MIAA, really, identify those rising stars, those superstars that, we may not be able to hang on to very long, but we're sure proud of what they're doing on our campuses. So this award is really one that's special to the athletic directors. We're in the nomination process right now. We're looking at people that are really, less than 5 years into their career on an MIAA campus in any type of an administrative role. And the athletic directors will look at all of the nominees in January, make a selection in February, and then we'll honor that person this year and every year after at our basketball tournament in March. And there'll obviously be a nice recognition that will go along with this. And I think whoever wins this award, especially this first award, I know it'll be very meaningful to them. But Jerry, has a great legacy throughout the NCAA of being a great leader, being a great mentor. And we really wanted to kind of capture those attributes as part of this special award.
Absolutely. Like you talked about, it's been approved. It's going to be announced today. We're doing this on Wednesday, the 25th. Obviously, a very special award is going to be in the MIAA for many years to come. Switching gears a little bit here, football replay stats. I know instant replay, we've talked about it. It's getting more and more polarizing at every level. NFL, Division I, Division II now is using it more. High school's even like wondering what if they should ever do that too. But so far, 48 games. I saw in your tweet, 48 games, 44 plays reviewed. Overall, how are things going so far with the review process this year?
Well, I think again, I think it's going really well, and I think it's worth the cost and the time that's put in to make replay work in our conference. Our officials want to get calls right, and this is another tool that helps us to try and make that happen. Replay isn't perfect. Our officials aren't perfect. Our coaches and student athletes aren't perfect, but we want to have all of the tools available, Chris, to make sure that the games are administered as fair and thorough as we can. And we saw replay last year, really play an important part in making a decision late in a game that allowed us to get a call right. That was the game involving, I think it was Fort Hays State and Missouri Southern, and Missouri Southern was able to have possession of the football that allowed them to kick a game-winning kick late. And we saw that kind of play out again this past weekend. Missouri Western and Nebraska Kearney, a tied football game. A question on whether or not the ball was out before the runner was down. We do have a replay angle that shows the ball carrier was down. Missouri Western kept the football, kicked a field goal to win that football game. So not every call is going to be maybe that important or occur at that stage of the game, but it's nice that we're able to look at plays whenever they happen. If a coach believes that something wasn't called right or missed, and the replay this year, Chris, we're using an additional camera than what we had in place last year. And so it's giving us an additional angle. A lot of people don't understand with our replay system, Chris. It's different than what you see on the MIAA network or on a video board in the stadium or with the iPad and the the SkyCoach technology that our officials have access to. They're able to zoom in on a play. They can from a camera that's recording at the top of a press box at midfield. They're able to take a play and zoom in to whether a toe is inbounds or out of bounds at the goal line. I mean, it's that type of clarity in picture. So it's a great system. And probably the thing that is the most meaningful and important part of what we're doing is related to targeting.
Yeah, ask you about that one.
We've had, I think, 12 targeting calls this year, Chris, that have been reviewed. We review every targeting call, every helmet-to-helmet call our officials make that result in an ejection. Those are automatically reviewed immediately. And of the 12 that have been called, 7 of them have been overturned. So there's enough in a replay where an official is able to see whether or not the crown of the helmet is making the contact with the other student athlete's helmet. And if not, those are overturned, and that student athlete that would have been ejected without replay is now back in the game. And that's very important. I think it's really why our coaches want replay to be used, because that doesn't involve a coach's challenge. Targeting is automatically reviewed, and about half of those are resulting in the player getting back and being able to continue to play in that game.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the targeting anyway, because that's such a tough call to make in real time, because anymore the athletes are stronger, faster, quicker. A lot of plays may look like targeting. I mean, how much of a focus was this when we got replay that targeting needed to be one of the biggest things that we have the ability to look at? Because in real time, if someone goes high, they may leave with their shoulder pad, but it still looks just as violent as maybe a targeting call would be at the same time.
Yeah, and the issues regarding a defenseless player,
Mm-hmm.
a wide receiver that's up in the air, the difference on whether a quarterback is passing or he's actually running the ball. All of those issues go into play. But the big thing, and we really didn't know this when we started replay last year, but the definition of targeting actually changed this past off season. So, what used to be a pretty broad definition of helmet to helmet contact and what what the rules were trying to police, has now really been modified, where you're really just concerned about the crown of the helmet, so that that face mask hit or a side helmet hit.
Mm-hmm.
You might still have an unnecessary roughness or some other penalty, but as far as being ejected from the game for targeting, if it's the side of your helmet, you're going to be back in. And yeah, that's what our officials are able to see now by slowing things down and looking at the actual contact, and what looks like a pretty violent collision that is helmet to helmet, when they're able to slow it down and take a close look at that particular collision, it may not fall within the definition of targeting that results in an ejection. So that's why these are getting overturned, and that's why we're doing this. And I'm happy that we're not alone on this year. The MIAA was able, through last year's experiment, to get the NCAA to change the rule. And there are, I think, about 8 other Division II conferences that are using replay this year. And I think they're finding out the same thing we are. It's a valuable tool, especially as it relates to these targeting calls.
Just looking at the stats a little bit here, 32 coaches challenges. I think probably people assume there'd be more, right? When you think of replay, there'd be more plays, more stuff like that goes in. Because when you look at the NFL and Division I, for that matter, especially at the Power 5 level, you feel like there's so many challenges week in and week out. Is the number of challenges that from the stats seem low to you or high to you, or just kind of what have you heard kind of overall about where things line up? Because like we've talked about, you look at NFL, there's challenges multiple every single week. It stacks up, but there hasn't been as many as maybe people thought here at the MIAA level.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of reasons for that. In college football, these replays are happening from the booth. It doesn't involve a coach challenge. So there's really no strategy at the Division I level on whether or not a coach should use their challenge on a particular play, because everything's looked at. At our level in Division II, what we have in place in the MIAA, our coaches have to be pretty confident when they're going to throw their challenge flag that there's something there that is going to be close and that they've got a shot at getting this. Because if not, then they're out of challenges and they also lose a timeout. So there's a lot at stake in putting your challenge flag on the ground. And our coaches know that. And so the other thing, because of that, they're not going to challenge, the spot of the ball,
right?
At midfield or something like that you might see in the NFL or college football. Cause at that stage of the game in the first half, a questionable spot, may not be worth the risk of losing a timeout and now not having challenges at the end of the game when, it might be most critical. The other thing I'd say, Chris, I think our coaches are are well aware of the limitations we have
Mm-hmm.
in Division II and in the MIAA, where we're only using 3 cameras. You know,
Right.
an NFL game may have 20 cameras
Yeah.
that provide a number of different angles, including you know, a sky cam looking down on the football. Our coaches, and I know they go through this as part of their pregame, especially when they're the visiting coach. They're looking around and asking the official, now where are the cameras that are going to be providing the replay shots that you'll be looking at, and they're looking at where those cameras are on the visiting side or the home side, the end zone. What type of angles will that camera provide a clean look? And you know, if it's a camera that's behind the end zone versus a camera that might be looking down the end zone, that'll make a big difference on a goal line play on maybe whether or not you decide to challenge something. So that plays into it as well. I think just our coaches being aware where the cameras are, maybe some of the limitations that exist, and whether or not it's worth risking losing your challenges and being charged a timeout.
Talking with MIAA Commissioner Mike Racy, and let's move to probably a little bit of a disappointing conversation a little bit, because I know I've talked to coaches in the league, and you've talked about it a lot, and we've talked about it a lot too. The news coming out last week from the NCAA Division II Management Council about the opposition to the football schedule flexibility that the MIAA is sponsoring. I guess first initial thoughts coming out of that announcement that we saw late last week.
Well, I guess just a couple of thoughts, Chris. I'm disappointed. You know, on issues like this, where you've got 5 of 14 football conferences that have signed on to sponsor a proposal, and pretty, pretty, at least at the beginning here, good support for a possible legislative change. An issue like this, I think, it's wise for your governing bodies to maybe sit on the sideline and let the membership debate and make that decision. We are a membership association. Decisions are really intended to be driven from the grassroots up, and not from a governing group down, especially on key legislative issues. I think there are a lot of people around the management council that probably don't realize and understand how important football is to many conferences and many schools in Division II. Football makes membership decisions, and you've got a group of schools that are playing high-level Division II football that are saying that we can't continue to play 11 games in 11 weeks, and we used to not do that, and the calendar collapsed, and we're trying to fit in as many games as we can before the playoffs begin, and people want to play 11. It's important not only for our student athletes to have 11 games, it's important for our communities to have 5 or 6 football weekends that they host, and having alumni back on campus, and people in bars and restaurants, and people staying in hotels. And so 11 football games is important, and 11 weeks to play 11 games is pretty crazy. The high schools don't do that. The pros take an off week. Division I takes an off week. Even the NAIA is taking an off week, and we should be able to figure that out in Division II. I guess the last thing I'd say that's really disappointing, Chris, is the process that exists in Division II. Mm-hmm. The management council, you're able to vote on this, whether you support it or oppose it, even if you don't have football. And at the convention, the actual legislation will be only voted on by football schools. But we had more than 10, I think almost half of the individuals that were voting on this and saying they opposed it from the Division II Management Council in Indianapolis. They don't even have football, and so that's my point. They don't understand, and it's disappointing. But we're not defeated. This is a really, really critically important change that needs to be made. There's some flexibility that plays into this. There's some scheduling opportunities to play into this. The biggest issue is the health and safety of our student athletes, and that
Yeah.
wasn't even addressed by the management council. So, you're probably going to talk about some of the points that they're concerned about. You don't hear health and safety in that. It's one
No.
of the major reasons why we're trying to get this passed, and it's disappointing that a governing body, a governing group, would not see the importance of the health and safety of our football student athletes.
I guess one of my questions from the rationale points is adding a 12th week at the end of the season. I guess what's the difference from adding a week earlier to adding a week later? Because then you're pushing back postseason. You're already going into December. I mean, mid-December. You get further in, and depending on where you're playing, weather is going to be a big factor too at the same time. Now, I know it's in Texas, national title game right now, so Texas weather is usually
Yeah.
not that extreme. But what's the difference between week 0 and then adding a 12th week there at the end of the year?
Well, that was one of the things that the management council came back with, that, there's a different solution. Instead of adding a game or a week on the beginning of the season, let's push back the playoffs. And, that would be great. But that's going to take a lot of time. The NCAA is in the middle of negotiations for new media contracts. Then your media partner, whoever's broadcasting the championship game, they're going to have to be comfortable having the game after New Year's instead of before. They may not want to do that with other bowl games and other commitments that they have, NFL playoffs or games. So that, that may not even happen. And then you mentioned it, your championship host site, they'd have to approve. They've got an agreement in place on when the championship will occur. They'd have to agree that, yes, we can accommodate moving the championship till after the new year and pushing everything back. And then you'd have to go through another legislative process. So, my point to that argument is, great, start working on that until you get all of that fixed. Put week 0 in place, because this extra week is needed now. And if you're able to accomplish that, if you're able to extend the season, then we have conversations about what the best calendar would look like for Division II football. But or maybe we have both. Maybe we start the season a week earlier and the season goes a little longer, and we have 13 weeks to play 11 games. There's nothing wrong with that either. But flexibility and options and choices are always a good thing, I think. And so my answer to that concern is, go ahead and start working on that. But until that happens, put week 0 in place, because the flexibility and the health and safety of football student athletes is too important to wait.
I'll touch on one other one, because the other ones are kind of life in the balance philosophy, student athlete experience, impact on administrators, but the budget impact, potentially cutting institutional programming. Like they said camps, I guess. What does that mean, kind of, when they say examples were camps? Is that just like summer camps that are offered for student athletes, stuff like that? Or what is the true budget impact of moving that week 0 in there?
I guess they're talking about, institutional camps that they may be running, into mid-August, that, they may not be able to have that same calendar for a camp. And if they can't move the camp earlier, potentially lost revenue to the school. That's certainly not what I'm hearing at MIAA schools or schools in the Gulf South Conference or the GLIAC. That the camp schedules are pretty flexible. There's that word again.
Yeah.
And can probably be moved around. The cost, there is a cost of bringing student athletes in a week earlier. And, my point is that, hey, the NAIA is doing this. We've had a lot of schools that have moved from NAIA to Division II, and it's intended to be a step up. It's intended to be a further investment in an intercollegiate athletics experience that meets or matches the expectations of when you're in NCAA. That blue disc means something. And if the NAIA is able to do this, we sure ought to be able to figure this out in Division II. And that additional cost, it's going to be a lot more expensive to try and find an opponent that you may need to use to fill a schedule in week 5, week 6, week 7, when you're in a bidding game to try and pay someone a guarantee to come and play you, or that you'll go play somebody across the country. It's going to be a lot more expensive to do that than to bring your student athletes in a week early. The thing they also didn't talk about, Chris, is that early week for a lot of schools, there's a revenue component to this. There's a couple of conferences that are helping to sponsor this, the CIAA, the SIAC. They have some media and sponsorship guarantees on the line for being able to host, do some games in week 0. There are other schools that might have similar opportunities to create a destination type game that fans and others might want to travel to and be a part of. And then, there's the opportunity for some of our schools to try and hook up with an FCS school and maybe get a guarantee themselves,
right,
for going to play. Maybe Northwest Missouri State is able to schedule a week 0 game against Missouri State. I'm guessing they may not want to play Northwest Missouri State, but if they did,
right,
they'd probably have to pay some money for Northwest to come down as a Division II to come play an FCS school. So though there are revenue opportunities too. So there's a lot of points that I think counter the cost or financial concerns of doing this. There are costs; it's real,
right.
But we should be able to figure it out. And I'm not willing to let those costs stand in the way of having an additional week that allows for our student athletes to have a bye week for rest and recovery during the season.
So what's next for these proposals? Because obviously this isn't the end of it, but it's also kind of a, I guess, glaring opposition to it when it comes into the legislative session, in January too.
Well, I think I guess things are moving toward a lot of good debate and discussion on the convention floor, and that's what's supposed to happen. It's usually supposed to be member to member, and not necessarily the management council trying to insert themselves in a proposal that most of the members of that council don't even sponsor that particular sport. But we'll see. I'm still confident that that folks, as they think through this, they measure the flexibility and the scheduling opportunities that are created and the benefits from a health and welfare standpoint. At the end of the day, we'll vote in favor of this. And at the end of the day, it's permissive legislation. So if schools are really bothered by starting in week 0, start in week 1, run your 11 game schedule, and nothing's changed for you. And I think too often our division gets fired up about competitive equity issues and some of these cost issues. And I think we've seen from some of the trouble that Division I has found themselves in, trying to legislate around equity, competitive equity, or trying to keep people back because of cost-related issues, oftentimes leads to not just membership problems, but sometimes legal issues. So, and then the other thing that really, upsets me about all of this, Chris, something I was involved in at the NCAA when I worked there, was the creation of the Life in the Balance philosophy. And a lot of people that weren't even around when that was created, throw that around now as kind of magic words, this proposal is contrary to life in the balance, and that that there they believe should close the book on that particular argument. That nothing you should propose or do should inhibit my definition of life in the balance. And that's the thing I try to point out to people. Life in the balance, as it was designed and created, there is no one size fits all definition.
Right.
There's no supreme group or body that's been empowered to define what life in the balance is for Division II. It's an individual definition. It's a definition that really exists for our student athletes to understand whether or not they're having a balanced experience in these things that we say are very important in Division II. Classroom, competition, and community service. And it's up to each individual to decide what that balance looks like for them. Division II has adopted this mantra of make it yours, make it yours. Well, that's what we're trying to do with this proposal, allowing the membership to make it theirs on the most appropriate calendar to fit in 11 football games. And, the idea that, that life in the balance is somehow static or constant or unchanging. It's my definition as a member of the management council. And, if you're not doing something that I think is appropriate for life in the balance and you can't do it, that's not the way this was supposed to work. Life in the balance is a philosophy. It evolves with time, and it must change to fit the changing needs of our student athletes and our programs for them to be most successful.
MIAA Commissioner Mike Racy, obviously a lot to kind of still go into as we get closer to the legislative session here to see what happens with the week 0. But it's a pleasure as always to talk to you, and I'm sure we'll be revisiting this conversation here in a few weeks as well as we keep getting closer and closer to time for the decision to be made, actually, too.
Absolutely. I'll keep you updated. But like I said, Chris, I have confidence and faith in the good people in Division II, the folks in our membership that will come to the convention and be prepared to do the right thing for Division II football and all of these programs out there that say they need this to be successful and to provide the type of balanced student experience that we want. So I'm disappointed, but not defeated. And we'll look forward to a good debate on the convention floor, and I'll keep you updated as things progress.
Speaking of debate, I'm sure our next conversation will be about how many teams get into the postseason for football. So that'll be a fun one in our next conversation too, as the rankings are slowly starting to come out here. First ones came out this week, but it's just 10 teams that are up for recommendation so far. So nothing in place, but I'm sure in 2 or 3 weeks, fans will be talking quite a bit about who's in and who's out and who's left out. So that'll be a fun one for us too. Commissioner Racy, thank you as always for your time.
You bet. Good to see you, Chris.
Good to see you.